Neon Genesis Evangelion is a deconstruction of the mecha anime genre, which is a phrase said by a lot of people who do not know what a deconstruction is, confusing it for parody or homage or anything derivative. When trying to name precisely what it is that's being deconstructed, you typically end up hearing descriptions of tropes so generic to the point of only appearing in parodies of other works in the genre. The type of perception one has of anime if they've never watched an anime before, and assume they know everything they need to from Western shows mocking it. Even the most mainstream of mecha anime were questioning the idealism of the early market at the time, so it's not revolutionary to suggest that sending children to die in wars inside of giant robots maybe wasn't as cool deep down as it sounds. Most deconstruction is just introspection, there's nothing deconstructive about it. This then raises the question as to why one would want to attach such a label to a work in the first place. Is it out of fear that watching anime like this might make one appear childish? Is it a label meant to make a work appear more intellectual and thus more mature? Why would someone have the shame needed to make this justification? Is it a vibe that viewers pick up from the creators? How is the vibe added to the work? Is that a disdain for the medium, or is it a deep understanding? Is it just a label for anything with a dark tone? Does Neon Genesis Evangelion even deserve this conversation? Now, I would love to make a video where I go deep and exhausted into the full history of mecha anime, and I describe in thorough detail the entire history of every big robot to ever be on TV, but I don't have the time for that. Nor would I ever feel comfortable to claim to have the knowledge to make that video, no matter how many more decades of my life I dedicate to the study. That's the somewhat frustrating thing about making video essays on any topic. I always feel as though I'm not enough of an expert on a subject to really describe why a certain TV show is culturally significant enough for a deep dive. I've had to force myself to care a little bit less, and to allow some of the more amateurish facets of my work to remain present in the final product, justifying this by saying that it makes the retrospectives more human than were they perfect in every way. More human is probably a term worth remembering. So this is not an exhaustive video about the evolution of the mecha genre as every work responds to other works and the culture that surrounds it, and instead, I'll be covering an anime that's considered extremely influential in the genre to the point of redefining so much about it as to be practically mandatory viewing for any fan of Big Robot. I mean, you saw the title of the video and the thumbnail, so I assume you kinda know this already. Before starting the video, a couple of warnings. One, you've probably already figured out that I have an American accent, so I'll be saying all of the non-English words a bit American. Sorry. Secondly, this video isn't so much a video as it is a slideshow with my voiceover. This is because the video isn't meant to be watched so much as listened to while you do other things. Ideally, this is background noise with the images on screen slightly representing what I'm talking about, or maybe just a cool shot that I thought looked nice. There are going to be spoilers ahead. I don't know why anyone would assume otherwise if you clicked on the video. I'm just putting that out there. I mean, it's an old show. It's old enough that forum posts arguing over whether Rei or Asuka are better are not just old enough to drink, but old enough to be recovering alcoholics. Anyway, no more stalling, on to the actual retrospective. Angel Attack. The show begins in the far-off, distant year of 2015, as Tokyo 3 is being attacked by an angel named Sachiel. This has put the entire area under orders to shelter. Not sheltering is Shinji Ikari, instead standing at a phone booth because that's the location he was told to wait at. This immediately establishes his character between the nonchalant way he stands alone in a dangerous city, cutting to the battle against this giant angel the JSSDF is currently waging. He puts instructions and other people's demands above his own well-being. Shinji's rescued in the nick of time by Misato Katsuragi as she drives off with the boy. None of the military's weapons are effective against this angel, something Gendo Ikari attributes to an AT field. So the military decides to try their last resort, something they call an N2 mine. The impact of this mine flips Misato's car over, with her and Shinji getting banged up but surviving. They flip the vehicle upright and continue on their way to Nerv, as Misato internally complains about her dress getting ruined and her car getting banged up, despite the fact that, shockingly, Sachiel's still alive, just sitting still as it begins to repair its damage. Because the angel is still standing, they give control of the situation over to Gendo, who prepares to launch an Eva unit as their spare pilot has finally arrived, his son. The fact that Gendo is referring to his son as the spare helps to put into context the reunion between the two later. though even before this, one can see that a letter Shinji received from his father calling him over was torn up and then taped back together. Shinji is taken to Nerv headquarters and to the Geofront, a massive, top-secret underground area, where Misato gets lost in the winding tunnels and stairways, mostly so Ritsuko Akagi can be introduced to lead them to where they have to go. They arrive at the hangar where Unit 01 is kept, as well as Gendo, who Shinji finally confronts. The confrontation doesn't really result in anything, though, because Shinji's attempts to tell off his father have no effect on the man. An insult doesn't really mean anything, unless it's from a person whose opinion you care about. Gendo simply tells Shinji to get in the robot, and when he refuses, they bring out a bed-bound Rei to pilot it instead. SEELE resumes its attack on Nerv, trying to blast its way underground, which causes shaking in the base and a support beam to crash down onto Shinji. He's saved at the last second by the inactive Eva unit, which has come to life despite not being synchronized with a pilot. Shinji barely considers this because he was busy checking to see that Rei's alright, and when he looks at the blood splattered on his open palm and realizes that she's not, he agrees to pilot the robot. Once more, Shinji is putting his own safety aside to do what he's told, his selfless actions being compared to his actions at the beginning of the episode, and showing that this isn't necessarily a bad trait to have. Shinji is put into a plug which is filled with LCL, basically umbilical fluid, and inserted into the spine of the robot. The Eva unit is launched, and the episode ends with Shinji finally ready to face off against SEELE. Unfamiliar ceiling. The Beast. Shinji begins his fight against the Angel, though this consists of him awkwardly relearning how to walk before falling over and getting grabbed by SEELE. It begins breaking the Eva's arm, which Shinji feels due to the mental connection between him and Unit 1. The pain from this stops him from moving, where the Eva is picked up again as the Angel begins using a bone from its elbow to repeatedly smash a hole in Shinji's robot's eye. After his brain is damaged, Shinji wakes up in a hospital beneath an unfamiliar ceiling. Gendo discusses the return of the Angels with the Human Instrumentality Committee, who view it as a good sign that people will begin to put more faith in their projects, including the Human Instrumentality Project, though this isn't named yet. Misato and Ritsuko are surveying the aftermath of the previous day's battle, with Misato showing a bit of sardonic optimism before leaving to pick up Shinji from the hospital. But once there, she learns that he has no interest in living with his father, let alone even talking to him, and when she learns that he prefers to live alone, she makes the arrangements to have him live at her place instead. The two pick up some pre-packaged junk food before taking a detour to an overlook, where Misato shows Shinji Tokyo 3 emerging from underground, the buildings literally retreating to safety during a disaster. Between this view and the later conversation at Shinji's home, Misato is trying to cheer him up by convincing him he is home, both in this new city and at her place. But Shinji only very reluctantly accepts that he's even welcome in this new location, not helped by the ample amount of trash laid all around him and the beer cans in the fridge. She tries and fails to get him to unwind during a welcoming feast where she gets drunkenly upset that the boy's not acting manly enough to stand up for himself, eventually taking advantage of his passiveness to swindle Shinji into signing up for most of the chores on the list. He has a few more welcoming pains, like being freaked out by Pen Pen, Misato's pet warm water penguin, before retiring to his room to listen to his tape player, because in the far-off distant year of 2015, that's how people listen to music, and realizing he is, yet again, under an unfamiliar ceiling. Shinji then has a flashback to the fight itself and how that was actually resolved. After being knocked out, and the connection to the Eva severed, the employees of Nerv began trying to extract him in spite of the system's failure. Then Unit 01 goes what they refer to as berserk, as it begins to move with no pilot input. The movements of the Eva unit and the Angel it fights are similar in the sense that they're both just inhuman enough to reach the uncanny valley. It's like a human body that uses its limbs as tools rather than an extension of itself. SEELE fights at the start of the episode by growing an extra attacking limb from the back of its elbow, and the Eva grabs it during the battle with all four limbs rather than bracing itself the way a human would act. SEELE uses an AT field to defend itself from this attack, the thing that protected it from the missiles before, but Eva physically tears this shield open with its hands. The people of Nerv have their sciencey explanation of what's actually happening here. It's some sort of anti-force field to reverse the polarity or whatever, but these explanations do little to placate the audience that what's happening is any more than what they're seeing, the raw brutality of it all. This isn't helped when Unit 01 begins to break the arm of Sachiel the same way that Shinji's was damaged before. It's as if it's seeking revenge. It proceeds to stab at the angel's heart with a dagger before Sachiel grabs onto it once more and envelops the robot before detonating into a massive, cross-shaped explosion. In spite of this, the Eva is still standing afterwards, where it finally shuts down in time for the team to extract Shinji. Before this, there's one final scene where the Eva makes eye contact with him, the real reason he passed out, not the pain. Because Shinji's been through a lot lately, Misato comes into his room and tells him that he did a good job, though Shinji pretends to be asleep. The phone that doesn't ring. A transfer. Shinji is going through the motions of proper Eva training, committing his actions to muscle memory as the crew watching him speculates his reason for returning to the Eva was that he simply does as he's told. Misato is also concerned that Shinji has yet to make any friends at school, despite having been going there for 2 weeks, the phone she gave him never ringing once in that time. In one of these classes, we briefly hear about the rebuilding efforts following the second impact, the official story of which is a meteorite impacting the South Pole, which downplays the fact that roughly half the Earth's population was wiped out, as well as the ensuing wars to follow over the limited resources. Instead, it's radio broadcasts that mention seasons as a relic of the past, while bragging about how sunny and bright it is all the time. Even last episode, Misato mentioned that air conditioning was a triumph of humankind over nature. One of Shinji's classmates, Kensuke, is talking to another classmate, Toji, about his absences, the result of his sister being injured in the battle last episode, and the fact that he has to stay by his sister's side because she has no other family. Toji blames the pilot for this injury, and Kensuke suggests that the transfer student Shinji might be the pilot. When this is confirmed through a note passed during the lecture, Shinji's immediately swarmed by his interested classmates, save for Toji, who beats him up after school to burn off anger by his own admission. When Shinji says that he didn't even want to pilot the robot, this only makes him angrier. While Shinji's recovering, a bandaged Rei, also his classmate, approaches and says that an alert has been called due to the presence of another angel, Shamshel. The city goes under lockdown, and Misato sarcastically complains that the angels went from waiting 15 years to 3 weeks to attack. Toji and Kensuke are bored sitting around in a shelter, and as one of them is a military otaku, he convinces his friend to sneak out to see the fight up close because every other channel of communication is being censored. Shinji begins the fight, going through his training once again as he opens fire on the angel, only for this not to work because the smoke from his fire is covering the enemy. As there's no longer muscle memory from his training to rely on, Shinji freezes up, and Shamshel knocks the weapon from his hand before whipping at the Eva and breaking the umbilical cord that provides it with energy. So Shinji only has 5 minutes of reserve power to use. Toji scoffs at the lack of expertise that Shinji is showing, confirming his anger that he didn't do enough to prevent his sister from being injured. But Shinji and the Eva are thrown into the mountainside where Toji and Kensuke have been watching the fight from a distance, nearly crushing the two of them, who proceed to shut down in fear just as they were mad at Shinji for doing. They realize he still isn't fighting back, but this time it's because the Eva has grabbed the red-hot whips the angel was using, burning his hands to prevent his classmates from being hurt. Misato orders Shinji to allow the boys into the plug for safety, recognizing that watching them get hurt will affect his mental state and making it harder to fight in the future. This also damages the sync rate with the Eva, as there's now foreign DNA inside the robot, but Shinji starts screaming, pulling out his knife and stabbing the angel's core, holding the knife there until he runs out of power, just after the angel itself ceases to move. Toji and Kensuke then watch Shinji cry in pain inside the cockpit, gaining a bit of sympathy for what he actually has to go through. Not enough to actually apologize, though. After 3 more days of Shinji missing classes, Kensuke offers Shinji's phone number to Toji to call and apologize so he won't feel so guilty. But when Toji reaches a payphone, something that totally gets used in 2015, he changes his mind. Despite the brief popularity Shinji got from piloting the Eva, his phone still never rings. Rain. After the escape. Misato goes into Shinji's room to wake him up, only to find it cleaned out and empty. His classmates, Toji and Kensuke, arrive to drop off some of his missed assignments, saying he hasn't been at school either. Misato lies and says he's away for training, though she knows that the truth is that he's broken down under the stress of piloting the Eva. After being chewed out for disobeying orders last episode, he only responded nonchalantly to all of her words. Shinji, meanwhile, has been taking the train to the end of the line, riding until he's the final passenger, then walking around empty streets and nearly empty movie theaters and so on. This montage gives us the most personal look at the people of Tokyo 3 thus far. Last episode, Toji mentioned that there are very few people in the classrooms or out on the streets through a combination of population loss from the second impact, as well as the danger of the angels attacking the area. Even in the outskirts of the city, there are very few people, adding to the sense of isolation that Shinji feels, not just when alone, but the fact that he feels the same way when surrounded by people. Shinji decides he ought to return home and slowly walks there, even recreating a shot from Ghibli as he rests by a statue to Jizo-san, the patron of travelers, before stumbling upon Kinsuke in a field recreating military battles for fun. Kinsuke invites him to his tent and talks about how lucky Shinji is to pilot the Eva and live with Misato and such. Shinji attempts to tell him it isn't so great, that if Kinsuke was a pilot, his mother would worry, but Kinsuke says he doesn't have a mother, not that that bothers him. The next day, Shinji is retrieved by security forces from Nerv, with Kinsuke just sitting there watching, something Toji chews him out for, though he defends himself by saying it's not about bravery, but realism, whether or not to fight. He's beginning to see that the thrill of combat is an optimistic way to look at the world. The reality is that Shinji doesn't have an enviable position, as fighting against your will never make you feel like a hero. The two boys then meet with Shinji at the train station, knowing to meet him there because several of their other classmates have been taken there in the past. Toji asks Shinji to punch him in the face because it's the only way they'll be even. His sister, the one he was looking out for, chastised him before for being mean to the pilot, saying it was the robot who saved her. Shinji punches him, then apologizes for being a coward and not fighting, despite the other two clearly seeing it isn't something anyone would want to do. Misato arrives at the station, thinking she's too late to stop Shinji from leaving, but after the train pulls away, they see he's still standing on the platform. After a long pause, he finally admits he's come home. Shinji has spent the entire episode wandering around the outskirts of the city and the countryside, feeling lonely everywhere no matter how many people he surrounds himself with. Misato calls this the Hedgehog's dilemma, that it's impossible to get close to people without hurting each other. And while this may be true, what is just as painful is to avoid others living in isolation. If you're going to be hurt if you spend time alone, and you're going to be hurt if you spend time with others, then isolation becomes more of a choice. Even if you're choosing not to pursue social interaction, you've still chosen something. Toji asks Shinji to punch him in the face, explicitly demanding to be hurt by Shinji, as he'd feel guilty otherwise. So to see a person actively inviting pain into their life in order to have a social interaction recontextualizes Shinji's choice to remain isolated. There's no good without some bad, but the bad can arrive without the good just fine. Beyond Rei's Heart, Rei I. In a flashback, Nerv is testing the activation of Unit 0 and its pilot, Rei. The activation fails, as the Eva goes berserk, repeatedly punching at the control room before the entry plug is violently ejected, explaining how Rei got her injuries at the start of the show. The Eva has its power source removed, and it's encased inside of essentially a plastic concrete, as Gendo rushes over to rescue Rei by pulling the emergency eject on the red-hot hatch with his bare hands. Back in the present, Shinji, Misato, and Richiko are observing the remains of an angel, as Richiko explains that, despite being made of materials not from this earth, the angels are almost genetically identical to humans. But when Shinji sees Gendo observing the core of the angel, he notices that his father's hands are burnt. After hearing the story of how this happened from the others, he's incredulous that a man like Gendo could possibly have hurt them in such a selfless way. The next day, he is watching Rei at school, getting teased a bit by his friends for looking at her, though Shinji is just wondering why she doesn't appear to have made any friends or what it is that his father sees in her that's not present in him. During another test the next day, he uses the camera feature of his Eva to watch the two of them chatting, and contrary to everything he knows about them, Rei and Gendo are actually smiling. At a dinner hosted by Misato the following day, we see that her apartment is now far cleaner than it used to be. Shinji's presence keeping things in her life much more organized, although she still has gross habits like living off of instant foods. Richiko mentions that Rei has received a new ID and asks Shinji to deliver it to her, partially to get the two pilots more acquainted. He heads to a rundown apartment where even the entryway is dirty, as if Rei wears her shoes indoors, a very non-Japanese thing to do, as well as several bloody bandages that she's been changing herself. He walks deeper into the apartment when he sees his father's broken glasses, a memento that Rei kept from the plug incident earlier. Rei steps out of the shower naked, but not caring about the fact that Shinji sees her undressed, reinforcing what Ritsuko said about her being bad at living, as though she's never been socialized to the point of not understanding social situations. Rei is far more concerned about Gendo's glasses than about Shinji, even after he falls on top of her rom-com style. Shinji forgets to actually give her the new ID card, so he follows her to Nerv and hands it to her at the gate. When he tries to apologize, Rei is unsure what he's even saying sorry for, until the conversation shifts to that day's activation test. He asks her if she's nervous about this test, and Rei slaps Shinji for lacking faith in his father's scientific work. The test winds up successful, but before they can do any more than just an activation, a new angel flies towards Tokyo 3, with Shinji deployed to handle it as Rei isn't yet ready. The angel fires a laser at Unit 1 just as it rises to the surface, and Shinji's LCL begins to boil. Showdown in Tokyo 3, Rei II. Misato orders a retreat from Ramiel after it injures Shinji, emergency ejecting his plug as he is rushed to the hospital, forcing Nerv to come up with a backup plan. Their time to make this plan is limited, however, as Ramiel begins to force a drill into the center of Tokyo 3, directly attacking Nerv headquarters through the geofront. They begin launching a series of dummy attacks against the Angel, eventually learning its weaknesses and strengths as it automatically attacks anything that comes near it that's viewed as an enemy, even dummy balloons of Eva units. Each of these successive Angels has been an improvement on the one before, designed to counter the weaknesses of the previous failure. Last time, Shinji defeated Shamshell in close quarters combat with his knife, so Ramiel is designed to attack things before they get close, focusing more on defense. The drill is even referred to as a shield. While Shinji's recovering, Misato takes charge of the plan to defeat the new threat without getting too close to the point of destruction, navigating the bureaucracy of several organizations to not only commandeer a heat shield from the space shuttle, a giant rifle from the military, and the entire power grid of Japan in order to snipe the Angel from outside of its tested combat range. We've seen before that Misato is a bit ditzy, prioritizing the wrong things and struggling to function in her life outside of work, whether it's her messy house, messy eating habits, or constant drinking. But when things get serious, she's able to shift gears effortlessly to work in a professional environment. Given this, one would expect her to show less sympathy to people like Shinji, who does as he's told inside the Eva, but seems broken up over doing so. The fact that she doesn't expect him to act the way she does, and even sympathizes with him when he fails to live up to the same ideal, means that to some extent, she knows that she's unhappy this way. Shinji recovers from his wounds and wakes up to Rei, who begins to inform him of the mission's timetable while ignoring his nudity as she did last episode. Like Misato, she is completely focused on the work she does while failing to properly function in society. But unlike Misato, Rei doesn't have any sort of hangups about this, as if she doesn't realize that she should try to live for more than her work. This comes to a head as they're awaiting the beginning of the mission, watching a blacked-out city skyline and discussing why it is that Rei pilots the Eva if she has so little else to live for. Rei simply says she's bonded to it. The mission begins and a nervous Shinji fires at Ramiel, though it fires back despite the Eva being outside of its effective range, the Angel having deceived Nerv before. The pull of its laser deflects the beam, and it misses, with the drill piercing the geofront and beginning to enter Nerv's headquarters. Ramiel fires again while they're reloading, and Rei's Unit 0 steps in the way to defend Shinji, despite the shield not being able to hold up to the heat of the projectile. After some waiting, Shinji manages to fire again, this time taking out the Angel's core and stopping the drill before it gets too far. In a mirror of the scene where Gendo saved Rei last episode, Shinji force ejects the plug with his Eva, then pulls Rei out of danger with his bare hands, albeit protected by the plug suit. Once inside, he chastises Rei for not just putting herself in danger, but for being nonchalant about it, as if her life has no meaning beyond its function as a pilot. He tells her to smile, something Rei doesn't know how to do until she remembers Gendo's face. A human work. Misato heads to Shinji's school, dressed up for the occasion and impressing all of his classmates, as she behaves far differently than her usual demeanor of slobbish and lazy. Shinji tries to convince his friends that there's a stark difference between her mannerisms at home and her behavior in public, but they simply say Shinji doesn't get it. Later, at Nerv, Shinji overhears a conversation as a few people are concerned with the budget of their programs due to the expenses of cleaning up Ramiel, though things are at least a bit better now that the Angels have returned, due to Nerv being the only organization to succeed in defending against them. As Gendo states, politicians are willing to divert funding away from rebuilding from the Second Impact once their own lives are at stake. Speaking of the Second Impact, Shinji learns that the Second Impact was not a meteor strike, but the first angel atom being discovered in Antarctica, and that the meteor story is a cover-up. Remember that the camera zooms in on Misato during this info dump. The next day, Misato exits her bedroom dressed up for a conference, much to the surprise of Shinji. She and Ritsuko attend this conference for a rival military contractor as they unveil their newest robot, Jet Alone. The presenter, representing Japan Heavy Chemical Industries, brags that his robot has a much more consistent nuclear energy source and does not require a pilot, meaning there's no risk of the mental instability of the 14-year-olds that Nerv uses. This whole exchange highlights a question raised about a lot of mech series and anime in general, namely that so many protagonists are teenagers. We know that this is because the intended audience is teenagers, so in universe, it's rarely given a thorough explanation as to why expensive military equipment would be piloted by children, rather than remotely controlled by a veteran. During the test run of Jet Alone, a systems failure prevents the robot from stopping, and it begins lumbering towards the control center, and then it keeps going towards a nearby town as the nuclear reactor on its back starts overheating. With no way to remotely override the robot, Misato takes charge of the situation and plans to have Unit 1 place her inside the robot directly to perform a manual override. The head of this rival corporation tries to call in to give permission to give her the password, but he keeps getting the runaround as he has to seek permission from one guy who wants it in writing from another, and so on. But some of the other employees just smash up the computers they have locking it down and begin unplugging various things in the way, as he finally ignores protocol to tell Misato the password, Hope. Misato dons a heat-proof radiation suit and has Shinji carry her to Jet Alone. Once she is inside, she holds the robot back while she climbs deeper in to locate the computer. Misato enters the password, and nothing happens, the computer ignoring her attempts at an override. With no other option, she begins trying to manually shove the control rods into place, exerting herself as much as she can and only making a tiny amount of progress. Just before the reactor reaches a full breakdown, the robot shuts off, as all systems revert to normal, something the people on the ground consider a miracle, although Misato suspects that something else is going on. Her suspicion is confirmed when Gendo meets with Ritsuko, and they celebrate that the false flag operation went smoothly, confirming that they alone will receive continued financial support. The next day, Misato is back to her slobbish self, with Shinji trying to complain to his friends about her behavior. They, however, consider Shinji to be lucky because she puts on such a perfect air around everybody but him, meaning she trusts him like family. Asuka Strikes. Shinji, Kensuke, and Toji are aboard a helicopter to meet with the Eva Unit 2 and its pilot, Asuka Langley Soryu, as she is being escorted by the UN Navy. Kensuke's excited to see all the military equipment, while Toji's more enthusiastic about showing off his hat to Misato, until it blows away to the feet of Asuka, though the wind blows up other things as well, resulting in Shinji's first impression of the girl being a slap to the face. The captain of this fleet is frustrated by the fact that so many resources are being dedicated to what he considers babysitting a bunch of teenagers, refusing to recognize Misato's authority on the mission as he considers the water to be his domain. Also aboard this ship is Kaji from Nerv's German division, who Asuka's happy to see, though Misato is upset that her ex is aboard, especially when he teases her in front of the others during lunch. Asuka is unimpressed with Shinji, but decides to show off her Eva anyway, bragging that it's the true Evangelion as the first two were prototypes and test models. There's then an explosion nearby which causes the fleet to go into panic, save for Asuka, who is excited at the opportunity to show off. Thus far, we've seen it established that the typical enthusiasm with which a mecha fan might pilot a mech when offered is unrealistic, as a weapon of war implies use on a battlefield, and that's an unfavorable place to be. The argument that giant robots are very cool, while correct, is counter-argued against by the sheer number of things wrong with the entire scenario that would make being a pilot a bad thing. And yet, Asuka is the first actual pilot we've met who seems enthusiastic about the entire ordeal, even excited that there's danger afoot, rather than reluctantly rising to the call. Kaji calls Gendo about the appearance of Gagiel and suggests that he might just leave early to finish his delivery, the reason the angel's actually attacking, which we don't see until the end of the episode. Asuka and Shinji change into plug suits and enter Unit 2 to prepare them to fight, despite not yet having permission to embark. Misato gives them the clearance despite the captain saying she doesn't have the authority, though once Gagiel begins sinking ships, it's clear permission has ceased to matter. Asuka then plays hopscotch to leap from ship to ship so her Eva can land near the power cable to receive more charge, with Asuka managing to fight gracefully despite the limited space available to move as her Eva does not have the equipment to fight in water. After trying to engage Gagiel in close quarters, Unit 2 is knocked into the water where the remains of a flooded city can be seen. Remember that the second impact melted the ice caps. The power cable begins to run out of line as Gagiel starts trying to eat the Eva, though Misato recognizes the situation as being similar to fishing and comes up with a plan to use some of the empty battleships in the fleet as bait. She orders them together with the crews evacuated, having Shinji and Asuka work together inside of the cockpit to create enough force to force the Angel's mouth open so the ships can remotely fire their charges inside, destroying it with a direct attack to its core. Kaji manages to deliver his package to Gendo, the embryo of Adam, the first human, and the thing the Angel was after. Additionally, Asuka joins Shinji's class as a new student. Moment, heart, together. Both of you dance like you want to win. Asuka, quickly becoming the new popular student, revels in her newfound adoration, much unlike Shinji, who reluctantly accepted when he was swarmed by the students several episodes ago, ultimately declining to follow up on this popularity and finding himself with a smaller circle of friends. Asuka tries to befriend Rei, but Rei merely says she'll only be friends if she's ordered to. Back at Nerv, Kaji has been flirting with Ritsuko in front of Misato, annoying her. Then an angel, Israfel, approaches from the coast with Shinji and Asuka deployed to deal with it. Asuka charges ahead against procedure and attacks this angel, splitting it in half with the first strike, but each half of the angel starts moving and soon both Eva units are defeated humiliatingly off-screen. Worse is that the JSSDF is able to drop an N2 mine on this angel, which disables its attack, the angel needing about a week to regenerate. As the behavior and ineptitude of these teenage pilots has caused a national embarrassment to Nerv, Misato is flooded with paperwork and needs a plan to defeat both halves of the Angel once it's reconstituted itself. She gets a disc from Kaji with such a plan, which will involve Asuka moving in with Shinji and Misato for their training. Shinji is upset with this arrangement, and Asuka's upset when she learns Shinji's not moving out, but their classmates are even more shocked until the situation's explained. Asuka struggles to learn any of the choreography the duo needs for this plan, yet despite her being the one to miss her marks, she blames Shinji for the mistakes. This is until Misato asks Rei to perform the dance instead, and the two are able to execute one stage flawlessly. Asuka is the type of person who has a need to be better than those around her, something she tries to do by outperforming them, though her usual method is to simply declare she is the greatest over and over until people believe it. If you say something loudly and frequently enough, people start to think it's true, especially if you start speaking about it first and people have nothing to compare the statements to. For now, Asuka seems like the tsundere archetype of character prevalent in so many other series, from rom-coms to other mecha. Later on, we'll be seeing that this is just a defense mechanism she uses to avoid getting too close to people, her own version of the Hedgehog's dilemma. But the show has entered its Monster of the Week story arc, so the characterization reflects the tone of fighting a big monster every week, with the real plot being something in the background. Asuka resolves to work harder at synchronizing with Shinji if only to prove Rei and Misato wrong, and over a montage, the two slowly start to coordinate together more and more. This culminates in a night where a sleepy Asuka mistakenly climbs into Shinji's bed. He tries to lean in to kiss her until he hears her call out for her mama, then realizes that she's just a child like he is, moving over to sleep elsewhere. The next day, Ritsuko approaches Misato regarding her relationship with Kaji, who recently groped her on the elevator. She confesses that she regrets ever having dated him, but it's clear there are still some different thoughts about the guy. The day of the mission arrives, and Israfel has reformed as expected. They launch their assault, which is perfectly timed, splitting the Angel in half, then working together to strike it while it's stunned. The mission is a success until the very end, where after they smash its cores, they stumble on top of each other and start arguing again. Magma Diver. Asuka is excitedly swimsuit shopping with Kaji in anticipation of her upcoming class trip to Okinawa to go diving. Kaji explains that he never got to go on his class trip due to the second impact, which partially explains the confusion a few other NERV employees have over why schools are bothering with fun trips and the like, despite angels invading. To at least let people live, rather than survive. Back at home, Asuka and Shinji are told they cannot go on this trip as they need to stay behind due to being on duty in case of an angel invasion. Shinji has accepted this a while ago, but Asuka's furious, saying she is tired of defending and wishes they could go on the offensive, so they can control when their downtime is. In the meantime, Shinji is catching up on some schoolwork, struggling with a physics question on thermal expansion that Asuka is able to solve easily, explaining that the reason she gets bad grades isn't due to a lack of knowledge, but the fact that she can't read all the kanji yet, which, same. Basically, Asuka is smart and talented, and simply lacks the ability to communicate her wants. Asuka gets her wish about taking the offensive shortly afterwards when NERV discovers the embryo of an angel deep within a local volcano, Mount Asuma, and Gendo has requested permission from the Instrumentality Committee to retrieve it, in spite of their warnings that the last time they interacted with an angel in this way was the second impact. Unit 2 is fitted with heat-proof shielding to be able to enter this volcano without being crushed by the heat and pressure as their last drone was. Her reaction to this suit is embarrassment as she was hoping to be the center of attention for her success, not while wearing a fat suit. As Asuka is lowered into the volcano to retrieve this angel, there's a tension about as the rest of NERV, as they fear they may be at ground zero for the third impact. The UN has jets scrambled above, prepared to drop into mines if something goes wrong. Asuka is barely able to see anything and goes far deeper than they expected the angel to be, but does eventually find and contain the embryo. But before she can be raised up, the angel, Sandalphon, grows in size and begins to attack her by swimming around and striking at while she's immobile, and without a knife due to the strap breaking under the pressure. So Shinji throws Unit 1's knife down the volcano to her, with Asuka managing to catch it in time to stab at the angel while it's attempting to eat her. The knife is unable to penetrate Sandalphon's armor though, due to it being forged under so much pressure, until they remember their lesson on thermal expansion from before. She reroutes the Ava's coolant directly into the angel's mouth, which weakens it enough that the knife can break through, defeating the threat and saving the day, though not before the angel slashes the cords, keeping Unit 2 afloat. She begins to sink when Shinji dives into the volcano and saves the day. Afterwards, the pilots and Pinpin relax in a sauna as Asuka tries to open up to Misato, only to be told her past doesn't matter. Shinji makes a thermal expansion joke when hearing the sounds from the other side of the wall. In the still darkness, the day Tokyo 3 stood still. A few of the employees of NERV are doing normal things like getting their laundry cleaned and chatting on the subway about upcoming work. Inside headquarters, they're beginning a test on Unit 0 when the power is suddenly cut, and the backup power's not coming online either. Misato and Kaji are trapped in an elevator together where they spend the whole episode. Shinji, Asuka, and Rei are above ground, unable to enter HQ because their cards don't work. When none of the alternative entrances are functional, Rei looks at her emergency card to read on what to do, and the trio determines they need to find another entryway, with Asuka declaring herself in charge, despite not knowing the route they need to take and continuously making wrong turns. This isn't helped by Shinji's indecisiveness, as anytime Rei and Asuka disagree, he refuses to weigh in. Another angel, Matariel, approaches from the coast and walks its way towards NERV HQ with long spider-like legs. The JASDF attempts to warn NERV of the incoming angel as they haven't done anything about it yet, but as the radio silence continues, they decide to manually fly out to NERV HQ to warn the others. This warning is heard by the pilots, as well as by Hyuga, who commandeers a campaign van for a local mayoral candidate to reach NERV headquarters faster. When he arrives inside, he's able to pass the message from the surface to the commanders, who proceed to prepare the Avas for manual launch, lifting the plugs with pulleys and using diesel generators. Even Gendo joins in, pulling the Avas into ready position with the others. The pilots then fall out of a ventilation shaft and into the HQ just in time to be prepped for combat, with Shinji being impressed by seeing the work his father is doing, as earlier he refused to consider showing up at Shinji's school for a career day. He starts to suspect that Gendo's way of showing love is through work, that he struggles to show affection with words and uses his actions instead. It's just a theory though, but Shinji is looking for any excuse to believe that his father's a good guy deep down. The Evas are loaded with the pilots, and they climb out of the launch shafts by hand, only for Matariel to begin dumping acid out of its eyes down the shaft. Asuka's Eva is melted a bit and they retreat for cover, with Asuka planning a different attack strategy where she plays defense, absorbing the next attack to pay Shinji back for last episode, while Rei retrieves their rifles and Shinji fires the assault. This plan, unlike Asuka's other strategies, works perfectly, and the Angel is defeated without the use of any electricity. As the three of them sit on a hill overlooking Tokyo 3, they discuss how much brighter the stars look without the city's lights on. Asuka says that the city looks empty with no lights, and she prefers it vibrant and full of people, while Rei says that humans are afraid of the dark and they push it away, even at the cost of the view of the stars. Shinji wonders why it's angels that are attacking them if angels are meant to be heralds of the gods, but Asuka dismisses the concern. The value of a miracle is, she said, don't make others suffer for your personal hatred. The episode opens on a flashback to the second impact as Misato is placed into an escape pod by her father before he dies, his final act being to keep her safe while giving her her cross necklace as a keepsake. Back in the present, Kinsuke and Toji are taking shelter from a rainstorm at the Katsuragi residence when they notice that Misato has recently been promoted to the rank of major, chiding Shinji and Asuka for not noticing this. Misato herself doesn't really think of it as she doesn't consider it a big deal, focusing instead on a harmonics test they have later that day. At this test, Shinji's sync rate has improved dramatically, earning him praise from Ritsuko, but this only angers Asuka, who brags that hers is still higher anyway. The two return home to a party being thrown for Misato about her promotion, though, with all the teens around, this quickly devolves into arguing and fighting, as Misato and Shinji discuss how much they dislike being praised for things, as they don't really understand the point of putting themselves up if it just makes others feel bad. Shinji then asks her why she joined Nerv in the first place, to which Misato deflects the question, only answering him later. Commander Gendo and his Vice Commander Fuyutsuki are both in what was once Antarctica on an aircraft carrier, discussing how lifeless it is there. Gendo considers this empty space to be purified of its original sin, but Fuyutsuki counters that he prefers a world of sin if it means life can live there. A new angel, Sahaquiel, appears over the ocean, a giant satellite-like being that drops parts of itself shielded with AT fields onto Earth, getting closer and closer to Nerv headquarters. Because of the massive force behind each impact, a large area surrounding Tokyo 3 is evacuated, though most of the staff of Nerv stays behind despite not being ordered to because it's their job. This includes all three pilots, who are ordered to essentially catch the falling angel with their AT fields, despite being told before the mission to write up wills for themselves should they fail. For agreeing to a suicide mission, Misato offers them each a steak dinner, which they consider a poor price for saving the world. Ritsuko warns Misato against using the Eva for such a doomed mission, claiming that she's got an astronomically low success chance and is only fighting because of a personal vendetta against the angels. Before the mission proceeds, Shinji asks Asuka about why she pilots the Evas. She says it's to prove that she's the greatest, which Shinji interprets as proving she exists. Then he has a flashback to Misato answering his question from before, the truth behind why she works for Nerv. Her father was distant and emotionless, just like Gendo, right until the second impact when he sacrificed himself for her. Because of this, she was unsure what to think about the guy, and she's fighting the angels in her own way, so she won't have to think about his work any longer. The mission begins as the three Evas are spread out across Tokyo 3, using visuals alone to detect the angel because it's destroyed all the satellites monitoring it. Shinji is the first to arrive at the drop zone, catching Sahaquiel but struggling until the other two show up. Asuka is able to break the AT field and stab at its core, with the angel collapsing onto the ground in an explosion that leaves behind a massive crater, though Nerv is safe. In the end, the pilots ask Misato to take them to a ramen stand instead of a steakhouse because they know her budget's tight, and because Rei dislikes meat. While eating, Shinji admits that he's finally learned his reason to pilot, calling back to an earlier debriefing, where his father, Commander Gendo, told him that he did a good job. Angel Invasion. Lilliputian Hitcher. Ritsuko is overseeing a test of the Eva autopilot systems through simulation bodies, while the Magi read the data coming off of them. The Magi have been explained before as 3 supercomputers who run most of the facilities at NERV, as well as having a degree of control over Tokyo 3 in general. There's a small amount of contamination noticed, attributed to a rush job in constructing the geofront after the second impact, but because it doesn't currently pose a threat to the test, Ritsuko orders that they continue it. That is, until the contamination rapidly spreads to the host bodies used in the autopilot test that starts to resist all the decontamination efforts that they attempt. This rot spreads to the host body for Unit 0, and the body begins attempting to attack the observers, getting removed as the plugs with the pilots are all ejected for their safety. When they try blasting the infected simulation body completely, Misato notices that the spreading contamination has an AT field, and they realize they aren't dealing with corrosion, but an angel. Central Dogma is evacuated and cut off from the rest of the facility, while Gendo calls the Japanese government to inform them it was just an error in their alarm system. He then commands that priority be given to protecting Adam, even at the cost of the destruction of the geofront. Additionally, he deploys Unit 1 without a pilot to stop the Avas from being taken over. Without any Avas to fight this angel, Ritsuko and Misato attempt to drown it with an excess of oxygen, only for the angel to quickly evolve to survive in the environment. It then hacks into one of the 3 computers making up the Magi, attempting to order a self-destruct of the whole facility. As all 3 of the Magi need to agree for this to go through, it begins trying to hack the other 2 systems, with Ritsuko barely managing to hold off the second computer from being taken over. This buys them a little bit of time to come up with a new plan, while it only controls one of the 3 supercomputers, and a meeting is called to discuss what it is they're up against. This 11th angel is a large number of smaller ones, basically the opposite of the previous angel that used brute force and size. They arrange themselves into an intelligence that's then used to evolve and adapt to incoming threats while learning more about the facility it's inside of. Misato suggests that they destroy the Magi completely to wipe out the angel inside of it, with Gendo just wanting to protect his own interests. But Ritsuko suggests an alternative, to reprogram the computers so the angel will destroy itself rather than NERV. Just as there were 3 computers, 2 of which are being taken over and trying to activate a self-destruct, there are 3 main people in charge of the mission, 2 of which are willing to destroy the facility as well. The temporary firewall is circumvented, and the second of the Magi is hacked into, so Ritsuko goes to Central Dogma to start reprogramming the final Magi to help counteract the invasion by literally entering the computer. Inside of it is a series of handwritten notes that aid in working on the Magi, as well as several other systems, left behind by the previous programmer. Ritsuko then proceeds to prep not for programming, but for brain surgery, as the final computer's a human brain, one she programs by rewiring parts of it. As it turns out, the 3 Magi are Ritsuko's mother, each of the computers representing her as a woman, as a mother, and as a scientist. And while Ritsuko always looked up to her mother, the scientist, she resented that she was a distant parent and a bad person, giving her the conflicted feelings that allowed her to do the work she needed to. The angel is counter-programmed in the nick of time and the day is saved, with much of the fighting being done internally, in the mind, rather than in the field. This will be more thematically important later on, as this episode had very little in the way of action for a series about giant robots. SEELE, Throne of Souls. Weaving a Story. A recap episode explained in Universe as being an interrogation of Gendo Ikari by SEELE, regarding the ongoing scenario involving the angel invasions. This recap touches on the publicly available records of each of the encounters, excluding details like the status of the pilots mentally, as well as completely redacting the entire previous episode, as Gendo claimed it never happened. The second half of the episode begins with a poem by Rei about her own existence, wondering who she actually is and hinting at the truth. These are revealed to be her inner thoughts during a cross-compatibility test of the Ava Units 0 and 1, with the pilots swapping robots. Rei is able to sync with Unit 1 fine, but when Shinji enters Unit 0, it goes berserk as Shinji's mind is invaded by thoughts of Rei. The power's cut off before it can do any more than reuse scenes from previous episodes, and Shinji wakes up in the hospital with minor memory loss. The episode ends with Gendo and Fuyutsuki discussing their own timetable distinct from that of SEELE, revealing the purpose of the mission to the Antarctic back in episode 12, retrieving the lands of Longinus. Lies and silence. Those women longed for the touch of others' lips, and thus invited their kisses. Gendo and Fuyutsuki are discussing their plans about SEELE, and that they're continuing to let the Human Instrumentality Project continue as scheduled, because it doesn't interfere with their plans. Kaji is in Kyoto, gathering information on the Marduk Institute, and learning that the committee that selects EVA pilots does not exist, and is simply a series of shell companies, meaning the pilots are handpicked by Nerv itself. Misato heads to a wedding of a friend, lamenting that she's been to so many weddings lately that she's almost out of formal dresses to wear. Through the show thus far, we've seen that a lot of people are rushing life events in the background. Following the second impact, many of the survivors have a sense that life is fragile. This is shown in things ranging from buying a steak dinner for people who risk their lives, to staying put during disasters, because they don't really have much else going on. This is shown in a more literal sense when Shinji arrives at the mass graveyard where his mother is enshrined, meeting with Gendo in person for the first time in a long while. Others have been saying that Shinji is more out of it lately due to nearing the anniversary of his mother's death, and he's even made connections about how motherly Rei looks recently due to this event being on his mind. When Shinji speaks to Gendo, the two discuss the fact that there is nothing remaining of Yui Ikari, not even photographs, and that she's not buried there. They discuss that it's a survival technique to move on from things, but that remembering the past is still what makes us human. Gendo leaves Shinji in a helicopter alongside Rei, with Shinji trying to get a last word in to say he enjoyed the time together, one last attempt to reach out to the human in Gendo. Asuka returns from her date with a friend of a classmate, saying she abandoned the guy at a park because he was boring. She is shocked to learn that Misato is out late with Kaji at the wedding and won't be home for a while. At this wedding, Misato leaves to powder her nose, with Ritsuko talking to the guy where she receives a token of his trip to Kyoto, with Ritsuko warning him not to keep digging into what he's doing for his own safety. Misato returns drunk, and she gets walked home by Kaji after vomiting on the side of the road. While walking, she opens up about how she keeps running away from things, even lying in the past to break up with Kaji before. Misato's interpretation of the Hedgehog's dilemma is to run away, the same way that Shinji has fled from his commitments in the past. She tries to stay aloof about anything serious in her life, which only works for so long. The rest of her friends are getting married and moving on with their lives while she is stagnated, pushing away relationships as much as she pushes away maturity, but this is only something that can be done for so long before life catches up to you. She even joined Nerv to fight the Angels, unaware that this is what her father did before, and only continuing with the job out of momentum. Back at the apartment, Asuka suggests that she and Shinji kiss to pass the time. Shinji eventually breaks off this kiss by gasping for air, and Asuka runs to the bathroom to hide her reaction by rinsing out her mouth. Kaji returns, dropping off Misato. Asuka tries to convince him to stay by clinging onto his arm, but lets go when she smells Misato's perfume on the man. She once again hides her true feelings by blaming Shinji. The next day at Nerv, Misato catches Kaji sneaking into Terminal Dogma and holds him at gunpoint. She questions him about being a double agent, to which Kaji suggests that he's actually a triple agent, working personally for Gendo. She chides him for hiding this from her, so Kaji shows what else is being hidden, opening the door to reveal Lilith pinned to a cross by the lance of Longinus. Kaji calls this Adam, and Misato recognizes it as the thing from 15 years ago. The previous episode was a recap episode, something generally done in anime as a means of buying more time for the creative team to catch up to what it was they wanted to release. Neon Genesis Evangelion famously had a very hectic production cycle, some episodes only being finished within hours of their airing cutoffs. This has been attributed to anything from budgetary concerns to the personality of Hideaki Anno, whether this was his ego or perfectionism, or if those two tendencies are distinguishable. Around this time, the production of Evangelion has also shifted away from the typical Angel of the Week style, and it began to focus more on the introspective aspects of the characters. Again, the truth behind why this actually happened could be anything from a response to critics wishing for more action, to a reported incident in which Anno received a book on mental illness from a friend during production, and became fascinated with it enough to change the plot last second. I have far less interest in retrospecting upon the mental state of the creators of the show than I do in retrospecting upon the personalities of the characters. That said, this is the part of the series where Evangelion becomes, for lack of a better term, weird. The plot begins to throw out even more half-hearted biblical references as the truth behind the angel invasions is elaborated upon, and the plot begins to split into effectively 3 instances that all need to be followed to be understood. Like I said, I care far more about the psychology of the characters in the show and about how their personalities reflect the themes of Evangelion, and robot fights were never why this show was popular, so they're not why it's remembered today. Additionally, Neon Genesis Evangelion has had a variety of implementations in various mediums, each of which adds something to the story in its own small way, or even completely reshapes the way we all look at the show's plot. I want to keep this retrospective focused on the impact Evangelion had on culture at large, as well as focusing on as close to the core of the series as possible. Basically, I'm not about to go get footage of a pachinko machine to get the entire story. From here on out, I'm going to be making a greater focus on telling the analytical parts of the story while only recapping events that are necessary for this interpretation, as at a certain point, the lore dumps add little to the tales of mentally ill teenagers we're all here to see. Sickness unto death and splitting of the breast. Asuka burns herself in the bathroom and complains, to which Shinji apologizes, causing Asuka to get even angrier because his default reaction always seems to be to apologize. She's also upset that Kaji and Misato are now dating, justifying this as claiming that she's being an improper guardian to hide her real feelings. Later on, the pilots are undergoing a sync test, and Shinji has the highest score there, something Misato correctly assumes will boost his confidence. Shinji is excited to hear about the stores, though predictably Asuka is furious and Rei doesn't care. Shinji also gets made fun of by two kids on the bus for feeling good about himself. Then the angel Laliel appears out of the ground over Tokyo 3, taking the form of a giant shadow in the sky. The Eva are dispatched to fight against it, with Asuka sarcastically demanding that Shinji take the lead because he had the highest score. He confidently declares that he will take the charge himself and rushes towards the angel, firing his weapon only for it to disappear as the ground beneath him swallows him up. Nerv calls a retreat from the attack, leaving Shinji without power because the umbilical cable giving Unit 1 charge was retrieved without the Eva attached, meaning his life support system will give away in a few hours. They begin monitoring this angel from a distance as they come up with more information about it, learning that the angel is actually the shadow on the ground, and the object in the sky is a reverse shadow cast by it using non-Euclidean physics. Their strategy is to drop hundreds of N2 mines on it, while the remaining Evas use AT fields to shape the charge, hoping it will blast Unit 1 to safety or at least destroy the angel. Asuka is speaking with Rei about how it's Shinji's fault he's trapped inside the angel, hoping to deflect away from the fact that she was the one who goaded him into the attack in the first place. Misato, meanwhile, is furious at this new plan, wondering why the pilot's safety is less of a priority than the safety of the Eva, and demanding that Ritsuko tell her more about the Evas because she's beginning to unveil more and more of the truth. Ritsuko tells her that she knows everything she has to, and then takes over the operation. Meanwhile, inside of Laliel, Shinji is having a conversation with something with his own voice, discussing the fact that there are two Shinjis, the one he knows and the one in the minds of everyone else. It posits that the reason he runs away from things is not because he dislikes himself, but because he dislikes being perceived by others, as he lacks control over this. He's only an Eva pilot because he is trying to latch on to some kind of meaning, rather than really figuring out what it is he wants out of life. Laliel also begins to ask Shinji about the details of his mother's death, specifically the rumors regarding Gendo being the one responsible. Shinji remembers little of this other than the fact that his mother was smiling on the day she died, and he doesn't think it was his father's doing. As his life support systems run out of energy, he starts to feel very cold before hallucinating a vision of his mother with her face obscured, flying towards him. Outside of the Angel, the rest of Nerv is preparing to launch an assault on Laliel, with both of the remaining Eva units in position. But then the floor begins to crack and the shadow in the sky starts bleeding, Unit 1's hand bursting out of a crack in the side as Shinji emerges, the Eva covered in blood. The next day, Shinji wakes up in the hospital feeling fine and ready to go back to Nerv as Rei says they can handle things from there. Once he's alone, he realizes that he still smells like blood, just as the LCL did when it ran out of energy. There's a point made when Unit 1 bursts out of Laliel that's also touched upon elsewhere, more specifically at the beginning of the series as people praise humanity for its tenacity in surviving the events of the Second Impact. The rebuilding efforts are attributed to a certain human instinct to keep going that is praiseworthy. But at the same time, it's difficult to consider basic survival as at all notable. Not wanting to die is an instinct that everybody has. It's nearly impossible to fight it. You can test this out right now by trying to hold your breath as long as possible. Even with superhuman willpower, you'll start breathing again when you pass out. Also, I don't know if I need to do this for liability reasons, but for personal reasons I will. Do not try to hold your breath until you pass out. Please. The same concept can then apply towards Nerv and its effort to create Eva units to fight against the Angels. Again, fighting for survival when that's your only option isn't really laudable behavior, just basic instinct. And while we can sympathize and root for anyone trying to live while it's a person in a bad situation toughing it out, or even a fish caught by a bird flopping around, it's hardly a unique trait. Even then, we still root for the characters in these stories as we would wish for anyone to root for ourselves in the same situation. So the real key to what makes us human is not just our survival, but the fact that we want others to survive too. Selfishness is for beasts. Fourth child. The Instrumentality Committee is interrogating Misato regarding the recent Angel attack, wondering if it's possible that the Angels are attempting to learn more about humanity by reaching out to the pilots. They then discuss this with Gendo, who suggests that the Angels are beginning to develop intelligence and that they're running out of time based on the recordings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Toji once again visits his sister in the hospital, with the nurses discussing how good of a brother he is. Gendo talks to Rei about her classes and how they're going, getting simple responses to his simple answers. Then, Nerv II disappears completely. A meeting is called to discuss what could have happened to make an entire Nerv facility disappear within seconds, realizing that the explosion detected occurred around the same time that the S2 engine recovered from Shamshell was set to be installed inside of the new Eva unit being assembled in America. Ritsuko suspects that this was caused by the organization using technology they don't understand, like the Eva themselves. They're informed the US government is sending Unit 3 to Japan to finish construction because of the risk to their facility. Gendo has finished with the Eva dummy system and orders it to be installed on Unit 1 and Unit 2, but it's not quite ready for Unit 3 yet, so they'll be selecting a pilot from nearby to fill the seat. Ritsuko informs Misato that the fourth child has been selected, though she's unsure about announcing this new pilot due to recent fluctuations in Shinji's sync rate and the strain it could cause him to find out. Back at school, Toji is selected to deliver class handouts to Rei, and he invites Shinji along, despite Hikari, the class president, wanting to go with him. While inside Rei's empty apartment, Shinji starts to clean up some of the mess out of habit, and Toji points out that Shinji's become a completely different person in the last few weeks, though he also posits that maybe Shinji was like this all along and he simply never looked hard enough to learn this. Rei returns home seeing her house cleaned, and she thanks Shinji, realizing she's never said thank you to anyone before, not even Gendo. Misato shoos Kaji away when he flirts with Maya, asking him what he knows about the Marduk Institute. He plays dumb at first, but eventually lets slip that the organization that chooses Eva pilots doesn't actually exist, and it's all done internally by Nerv, also hinting at the fact that Class 2A is meant to keep all of the prospective pilots in close proximity for safety. Misato has to go to a meeting, so Kaji talks to Shinji by taking him to a field of melons, revealing that he grows them as a hobby. He mentions how educational it can be to watch something grow and that it brings him joy when they bloom and sorrow when they die. Shinji wonders if it's worth it to feel joy, if sorrow always comes with it, though Kaji points out that the only reason we suffer is to sympathize with the suffering of others. It's hard to be a good person when you have no knowledge of pain in life, you're just reacting to what's going on around you. A good person is someone who suffers and then fights to make sure that no one else has to go through the same thing. Shinji's recent sync test results come back, with his score having dropped, something she attributes to the effect of Laliel last episode. Kensuke then talks to Shinji at school, saying that he's heard rumors about the transfer of Unit 3 and the accident involving Unit 4. Shinji hasn't heard anything about it, which Kensuke assumes is a sign that it doesn't involve him, though he's also concerned about how much information anyone really has. Toji returns from a visit to the principal's office looking downtrodden and out of it, even staying late after school, where Hikari finds him eating alone in the classroom. She offers to make him lunch the following day as she realizes that he doesn't have anyone else at home, and he accepts. Asuka tries to talk to Kaji only to see the name of the fourth child, shocked at his identity before the episode ends on Toji playing basketball alone. A life choice. Ambivalence. Unit 3 has arrived in Japan, electricity crackling off of it on the journey over. Misato is dispatched to the test site to oversee the activation of the Eva, but before she can leave, she's stopped by Shinji, who asks her if the rumors about Unit 4 and the American facility are true. She confirms these rumors, but stops short of telling him the identity of the new pilot because she's unsure if Shinji can handle it. Toji is despondent at school, skipping classes to stare at the sky and even missing out on the lunches that Hikari made for him. Asuka and Rei realize that Shinji and Kensuke are the only ones who don't know the new pilot's identity, but they can't bring themselves to tell the truth, always assuming someone else will do it. Because Misato is away, Kaji is sent to her apartment to babysit Shinji and Asuka, telling them off for fighting among themselves before calling it a night. That night, Shinji asks him about Gendo's personality, and Kaji says it's impossible to really know another person because we don't even know ourselves. When humans spend their whole lives searching for meaning and identity, we're really just projecting something outward. But on the inside, there's still confusion, meaning that these projections are based on nothing. So we can't know people, just the versions of themselves they want others to see. The activation test for Unit 3 begins in Matsushiro, and immediately there's a massive energy reading due to the angel Bardiel being aboard, taking over the Eva and causing a massive explosion. Nerv is alerted of this incident and dispatches the other 3 Evas to fight against the angel. Shinji's worried that they don't have Misato in charge of the operation, but Rei assures him things will be fine because Gendo himself is calling the shots. Shinji is shocked to discover that the 13th Angel is an Eva unit, and he starts to fear there's a pilot inside of it, with Asuka trying to tell him this pilot's identity before getting attacked and knocked out before she can do so. Rei is then sent to attack Unit 3, but when she aims at the entry plug, she remembers a conversation with Toji from before, and hesitates long enough to get grabbed. Bardiel begins to drip some sort of acid on Unit 0's arm, which causes the angelic infection to spread to her. Gendo orders the arm to be severed, despite the nerve link still being up, meaning Rei feels her arm detaching through the Eva. The difference between Misato and Gendo as leaders is most obviously shown here, as Gendo is ruthless and pragmatic compared to Misato, who also prioritizes defeating the angels and preserving the pilots, but she's equally concerned about protecting them mentally, not just physically. This is shown to have its strengths in the continued happiness of the pilots. Shinji is far less depressive than he was at the start of the series, at least as of now, though the hesitation to do something that might hurt the pilots emotionally is what caused her to postpone telling Shinji the identity of who he's fighting. Unit 3, or Bardiel or Toji, grabs the neck of Unit 1 with freakishly extended arms and begins to strangle the Eva. The Staff of Nerv moves to reduce the sync ratio in order to prevent Shinji from feeling his own neck being snapped, but Gendo forbids them from doing so, admonishing his son for not fighting back against the angel. Shinji says he refuses to fight because he knows there's a human inside of the Eva, and he doesn't wish harm upon them, even declaring he would rather die than kill. So Gendo orders the dummy plug system to activate, putting the system's controls in the hands of this plug rather than Shinji, who is forced to sit and watch as his second body moves on its own. Unit 1 begins to fight this angel, strangling it until Bardiel stops moving. And then it keeps fighting, squeezing harder as more and more snapping noises are heard. Most of Nerv is unable to watch the scene unfold as blood splatters across the area before Unit 1 finally reaches the other Eva's plug, tearing it out and shattering it as well as the pilot. Misato wakes up near the explosion site to the sight of Kaji, who tells her that she and Misato are fine, but he touches a bit on the battle that took place. Misato regrets that she never had the chance to tell Shinji about the pilot of Unit 3, though during the cleanup operation, he sees this pilot being removed from the plug, a barely conscious Toji. A Man's Battle. Introjection. The episode opens on Shinji inside the Geofront, refusing to leave the Eva, as he demands that Gendo answer for his actions in activating the dummy plug and forcing him to nearly kill Toji. Gendo refuses to answer, instead ordering the LCL density increased to knock Shinji unconscious before he can cause any damage to the facility. Toji appears inside the train where Shinji was talking to himself inside of Laliel, watching as Shinji and Rei are discussing Gendo's actions. Shinji isn't just upset at the loss of control his father forced on him, but the fact that Gendo has never even attempted to learn more about his son's feelings, or to sympathize with him. Though Rei points out that Shinji has never made a real effort to get to know Gendo either. Toji then wakes up to Hikari sitting over his bed, apologizing because he never got to eat the lunches she made for him. Later, Shinji has recovered from his injuries and is called in to speak with Gendo, announcing that he plans to retire from being an EVA pilot and refusing to cooperate any longer. For this, he is kicked out of Nerv. His calls all monitored as Misato warns him he won't be able to enjoy many of his old freedoms because he'll be followed around due to what he knows. She also points out that finding a replacement pilot won't be difficult, as his entire class is full of potential candidates. Shinji once again says his goodbyes at the train station, but before he can leave, an angel attacks. Nerv prepares to launch Unit 1 with Rei as the pilot due to Unit 0 still being damaged from the previous fight, but Rei is rejected and forced out of the plug, so they insert a dummy plug into Unit 1 only for that to be rejected too. This angel, Zeruel, is quickly able to break through several layers of the Geofront's armor as it approaches Nerv, so Asuka and Unit 2 are deployed within the Geofront to fight it before it can reach Atom. She launches a barrage of various weapons, but fails to breach the AT field with any of them. Then, Zeruel launches a counterattack, chopping off the arms of Unit 2 and leaving Asuka in pain, before it removes the Ava's head with a follow-up, just after they're able to sever the neural connection. This head lands on top of a fallout shelter that Shinji was taking cover in alongside other civilians, the sight of which terrifies Shinji into leaving the safety of the shelter. He leaves in time to see Kaji casually watering his melons in a field as the fight unfolds, saying that his covert operations were discovered and he's been decommissioned too. Shinji is shocked that Kaji would be watering plants during a fight, but Kaji says there's no place he'd rather be when he dies. Rei, inside of Unit 0, charges out of Nerv despite not having her arms yet, and carrying an N2 mine in the working one. She rushes Zeruel and attempts to cram this bomb inside the AT field, though the Angel protects its core right before the explosion, taking out Unit 0 alone. Shinji then arrives inside of Nerv headquarters, demanding to be let into Unit 1 because he's the pilot, mirroring the conversation he had with Rei before, where she says she pilots the Eva because she's bonded with it. Gendo allows this, and Unit 1 is then dispatched inside the building to fight off Zeruel, pushing it into the launch pad and flinging both of them into the outer layer of the Geofront in spite of a missing arm. Unit 1 proceeds to smash at the Angel's core while trying to rip off its mask with blood vessels breaking apart, and then the Eva runs out of power. Shinji sits there, unable to move, as the Angel gets up and begins to fight the helpless Eva, smashing at its chest until the core is exposed. Then, Zeruel starts to attack the plug directly, trying to get to Shinji when there's a loud heartbeat, and suddenly, Unit 1 is active again. It blocks another attack from the swinging blades of the Angel, grabbing onto one and tearing off the Angel's arm before attaching the limb to itself and regrowing a human-like arm. The gathered Nerv employees are in awe as they realize Shinji's sync rate is now over 400% as the Eva slashes through the Angel's AT field effortlessly. The robot gets on all fours and rushes at the knocked-down Angel, tearing it apart and eating the flesh of the giant to get at the S2 engine inside. Once merged, the Eva begins to tear at its armor, with Ritsuko terrified as she explains the armor wasn't thus there for Unit 1's protection, but theirs. The armor was meant to control the Eva too. Gendo and Fuyutsuki watch from a distance, wondering how SEELE will react to the first step of Gendo's new plan. Form of the Mind, Form of the Man. Weaving a Story 2. Oral Stage. SEELE learns of the incident in which Unit 1 consumed and absorbed an S2 engine, something they believed impossible. They're afraid that Gendo is planning something on his own, but admit he's instrumental in getting them to where they were. Back in the destroyed Nerv facility, the staff picks up the pieces of the last battle, attempting to move to a new headquarters and rebuild without the aid of the Magi, by using the information of their last rebuild 10 years ago. Hyuga and Misato are concerned about whether they've properly restrained Unit 1, the scientist assuring her that there are no signs of activity, though Misato recognizes that it's moved without power in the past. Gendo and Kaji plan on telling SEELE a version of the truth. The destruction's not technically their fault because Unit 1 wasn't in their control, but for now they have a far greater concern regarding the pilot. Shinji is trapped inside of the Eva, and worse, he isn't physically inside of it. Ritsuko has a plan to reconstitute Shinji from his remaining ego, which is still inside of the Eva's LCL, though Misato isn't convinced, as this sort of thing is speculatory more than anything else. Shinji, meanwhile, is going through his own psyche, questioning several aspects of his past and his present, such as whether his father abandoned him, or if he ran away, or what difference there is. To Shinji, it's abandonment that made him run away, as he had no reason to stay with his father because he wasn't receiving the love of the man. So while Shinji physically abandoned Gendo, Gendo emotionally abandoned Shinji. He also blames Rei for this, saying that Gendo didn't need Shinji because he had her instead. When Rei suggests that she is the replacement, the episode uses a shot of Yui's grave. Likewise, during the other flashbacks of Shinji, he is able to hear and recall events from times before he was born, like his mother and father discussing names for their unborn child. Shinji if it's a boy, Rei if it's a girl. After thinking about his past, Shinji starts to think about his present, that he is the pilot of the Eva and that he fights angels because they're the enemy, and for little other reason. He reflects that everybody who knows him as the Eva's pilot, and that he's indispensable because of this. Not so much loved and wanted, but useful and needed. Back in the new Nerv, which as a cost-saving measure for Gainax has the same layout as the old Nerv, they're attempting to reform Shinji's body from the LCL, but their efforts keep getting rejected, with Ritsuko claiming this is because Shinji doesn't want to come back. The plug is ejected and the LCL, as well as an empty plug suit, pours onto the ground. Misato mourns their failed attempt at saving Shinji when he appears nearby, having emerged from the Eva and from the engine. Despite the recent harrowing experience, Misato leaves to spend the night with Kaji rather than Ritsuko, where she asks him about the Human Instrumentality Project. Kaji dodges the question by giving Misato a capsule, claiming it's the first gift he's given her in years. The Birth of Nerv. He was aware that he was still a child. The episode opens on footage from the Katsuragi expedition and their discovery of Adam, followed by the events of the second impact as a being of light is set free from the facility, destroying everything there. Fuyutsuki has been captured from Nerv, with Kaji being a prime suspect in his disappearance. Because of her relationship to him, Misato is also taken into custody by security forces who now suspect Kaji of being a mole within the organization. Fuyutsuki is interrogated by the SEELE monoliths, rather than by the committee in person, and he starts describing his history with the Nerv and its precursor organization Gehern. He was once a professor at Kyoto University, teaching metaphysical biology, when he was put into contact with a promising young student named Yui Ikari. Though in spite of her talents, she still says she dreams of a domestic life, rather than pursuing research. He also meets Gendo Rokubungi when he gets the guy released from jail due to Gendo claiming the professor is his guardian. Fuyutsuki immediately dislikes Gendo's personality and is shocked to find out he is in a relationship with Yui, who says that deep down he's actually a very nice person. It's suggested that he only showed affection towards her because he recognized her talents as a scientist, leaving a sense of ambiguity about their relationship. Was Yui correct to love him as she recognized that he was a deeper person, much in the same way that Shinji was closed off and guarded towards other people, only to be caring deep down as well? After the second impact, Fuyutsuki retired to a small village to work as a doctor, not considering himself a professor any longer. He's approached by a member of the Japanese government who asks him to tag along on a UN expedition to the site of the second impact, having been recommended by an anonymous person. This person is revealed to be Gendo, now going by Gendo Ikari because he's been married to Yui and they have a child on the way. He was a part of the Katsuragi expedition, only to have left right before the second impact happened. On this expedition, Fuyutsuki uncovers strange facts like all life down to the microscopic being wiped out of the area, while a massive cavern was discovered beneath the ground. In spite of this, the media surrounding the second impact covers it as a meteor impact, with SEELE and Gendo involved in hiding the truth. Misato's being held in isolation, flashing back to her own time at the South Pole, recovered as the only survivor of the incident, but going mute for several years due to the trauma. A few years later, Fuyutsuki comes into contact with Yui once again, as he has finished his personal investigation into the matter. He confronts Gendo with the evidence of SEELE and the second impact, but before he can go public with any of it, Gendo takes him underground to where the geofront is being built, showing him on this tour the work of the Magi that Ritsuko's mother, Naoko, is performing, as well as early construction of Unit 0, an Evangelion based on the blueprint found from Adam. Elsewhere and later on, Ritsuko Akagi has met Misato, who's now talkative and outgoing, befriending her as she's one of the few people who doesn't seem to freeze up at hearing Ritsuko's last name. She learns that Misato is in a relationship with Kaji and wonders what it is she sees in him. Yui, holding a young Shinji, is talking to Fuyutsuki about their work with SEELE, with Fuyutsuki trying to convince Yui not to be a test subject for the experiment. But she says she is going with the flow of things, and that her work is best for her son. Her son, Shinji, is then taken to watch the contact experiment involving his mother, with the rest of the experiment resulting in a freak accident and her death. This has a rough effect on Gendo, who, after mourning, prepares to suggest the human instrumentality project to SEELE. He also begins an affair with Naoko that Ritsuko finds out about. He also introduces who he claims is the daughter of a friend, Rei Ayanami, though Naoko is suspicious of this child and wonders why she's with Gendo rather than his own son, searching through the archives to learn more about the girl but only finding redacted pages. Soon, work on the Magi is nearing completion when Rei approaches Naoko in the facility and begins insulting her, calling her an old hag. Rei continues rage-baiting Naoko until she snaps, attacking the girl by strangling her until realizing what she's done and jumping from the control center. Back in the present, Kaji prepares for what he assumes will be his final mission, freeing Fuyutsuki from where he was taken, as Misato is also let out of where she was kept. On his way back, Kaji is confronted by someone who he greets as having arrived late. Misato returns to the apartment, hearing Kaji's final voicemail and breaking into tears, and Shinji drowns out her crying with the sound of his tape player, while lamenting that he is just a child who can't help her out. At least be human. Don't be. The episode opens on a flashback of Asuka and Kaji en route to Japan, with Kaji rejecting Asuka's advances after saying she is too young. It flashes further back to Asuka in the hospital, watching her mother talk to a doll as though it were her daughter, not recognizing Asuka. Meanwhile, her father is flirting with a doctor, having very quickly moved on. Asuka then thinks about her mother's funeral and how she declared she would never cry again, depending only on herself. All of these disturbed thoughts have damaged her sync ratio, with Nerv suggesting she might be useless as a pilot soon and discussing alternatives, shifting resources towards Unit 0. Misato discusses rumors with Hyuga about mass-produced Eva units, numbering up to 13, being developed in secret, wondering why now and what the goals of the committee are, not believing these stories that they're meant as spare parts for the other units, or a defense against multiple angels at once. Asuka returns home after seeing Shinji chatting with Rei at the train station, furious he's acting like nothing happened after reconstituting before, and continuing to pout around Misato, who dislikes how angry she's being. Asuka's mother then calls, with Asuka attempting to make some sort of power play by forcing Shinji to answer, but he just acts normal about it, making Asuka even madder. She then has a conversation with her stepmother in German, and then gets angry at Shinji for asking about it. After Misato hears her screaming at how much she hates living there, the next morning during a sync test, she suggests that the following mission could be Asuka's last one. She and Rei ride an elevator together in total silence for a while, before Rei suggests opening herself up to the Eva, as it has a mind of its own. She slaps Rei for talking to her, but attempts this anyway by ordering Unit 2 around, saying it's a puppet that should listen to its master. Then, Nerv detects the angel Ara-L orbiting the Earth. Because this angel is outside the effective range of their weapons, they can't do much about it other than wait for it to get closer. Because Gendo has ordered Unit 1 to remain in stasis, Unit 0 is dispatched to fight it with Asuka in Unit 2 as backup. But Asuka refuses to play this role and takes point against orders, preparing to fight the angel herself. As she awaits the targeting computer to lock on, Ara-L fires a beam of light at her, read by Nerv as a mental AT field that begins targeting Asuka's mind. Unit 2 begins thrashing about with Asuka screaming, but she refuses the order to retreat because she doesn't want to lose to her allies again. Asuka has a hyper-reductive worldview where everyone is either a winner or a loser. Part of her competitiveness comes down to the idea that she has to be the best because that's the only way to stand out without being weird or different. Because her mother was neglectful when she was growing up, she needed to do more to stand out to get this attention, only to then lose out to a doll with no will of its own. Asuka learning that her best wasn't enough. But instead of thinking her efforts were misguided or she was trying to get attention from a person whose attention she ought to be better than, she doubled down to become more self-sufficient. This way, she would never try to get attention or affection from anyone else, just adoration. But adoration based on being better than other people is not something easy to get, nor is it a way to assign value to every social interaction you have. Asuka herself gets angry whenever someone beats her at something, being it a social or physical interaction, and she ends up isolating herself because of this. All made worse when she actually does win at whatever arbitrary metric she was using, only to see that the losers of the world are happy. She considers herself better than the people who are having a better time than she is, so even her worldview is losing. All she has left then is her ability as the best Eva pilot, and now she has lost that as well, so her attempts to supplant self-esteem with adoration don't work. With Asuka unable to fight any longer, it's up to Rei to fight against the Angel, though it's still too far outside the range of conventional weaponry. So Gendo orders that she retrieve the Spear of Longinus, or Lance of Longinus, or Longinus no Yari, whatever, and prepares to throw it despite Fuyutsuki warning Gendo he'll have to answer to SEELE if he uses it so early. Misato is worried that an Eva contacting Adam might cause a third impact, but Gendo's silence confirms the theory of what the Angels are after has been a lie as well. Rei removes the lance from the Angel kept beneath Nerv, and it begins to regrow its lower half. Back on the surface, she tosses this lance into the sky, clearing away the clouds with its power and piercing the AT field of Arael, which is instantly destroyed. Asuka's brought into quarantine due to the mental contamination of an angel trying to enter the mind of a human, and she watches Unit 2 be removed from the city as she yells at Shinji because Rei beat her again. Tears. Rei III. Misato has locked herself in her room listening to Kaji's final voicemail over and over. This room is once again dirty because she's closed off to Shinji. Her drinking habit has since become a coffee habit since Kaji was killed. Also shutting herself off from the world is Asuka, who has left the old house to live with Hikari, though here she does little more than play video games all day. Hikari's attempts to cheer up Asuka by saying she did her best fail to give any comfort, as Asuka only takes this as meaning her best wasn't enough. Gendo is being interrogated by SEELE, who are furious after he lost the Lance of Longinus by throwing it at Arael last episode. He says that his priority was to defeat the Angel and not to preserve the spear, which SEELE doesn't believe, starting to suspect Gendo intends to betray them. This interrogation ends early when another Angel invades, SEELE. Misato arrives late due to having been locked away in her room and begins to lead the defense, with Gendo demanding that they deploy Unit 2 in spite of Asuka's low sync rate, as he thinks she might still be useful as bait. The Angel floats above them, its AT field alternating too rapidly for them to get any real information and forcing Nerv on the defensive. Rei is deployed alone as Unit 1 is still in stasis following the earlier Berserker Mode incident. SEELE launches an attack, going directly for Unit 0 and breaking through its AT field. Rei grabs onto it and immediately her hand grows an infection of veins on it, not only the Eva, but Rei herself. Asuka is deployed in Unit 2, but with the sync rate below 10%, can only stand there, eventually forced to retreat. Inside of Rei's mind, she feels a second present, guessing at first that this is the her inside of the Eva, but then seeing this angel taking the form of herself. This angel asks if she wants to join together, and also questions the feeling that she's feeling, an emotion known as loneliness. When she realizes what she's feeling, Rei begins to cry, as the angel starts merging with her more, taking on several different forms to mitigate how lonely it feels. Gendo sees this and immediately deploys Unit 1 in spite of the freeze, with Asuka mad that Gendo's trying to save Rei when he wouldn't do the same for her before. Shinji begins to fight this whip-like angel, but when the Eva grabs it, Shinji's hand begins to grow several tiny Reis who complain of the pain from the Eva's rifle. Rei briefly wonders if she ought to merge with Shinji as well, but decides against this, hoping to save him instead. It's interesting that in her human mind, saving someone means allowing them to live distinctly of others, protecting Shinji by preserving his independence. Rei reverses her AT field, causing the Eva unit to begin to bloat up as though pregnant. Then, she begins to merge with the Angel as Misato orders her to eject from the Eva to save herself. Rei refuses the order and absorbs the Angel into the Eva's core before self-destructing, taking out the threat and herself in a massive explosion. Misato orders a team out to retrieve the body, but Ritsuko questions whether there's even a body to retrieve at that point. A team does manage to find the entry plug, but it's completely empty, so Ritsuko orders the scene to be classified top secret. SEELE holds another meeting, discussing how, with the 16th angel destroyed, their plans are nearing an end. To better understand what Gendo's plotting, they intend to interrogate someone from his inner circle, and ideally, get a new cat's paw to work from within. Misato tries to comfort Shinji after the death of Rei, though he pulls away from her in rejection. She wonders if he's afraid of women or if he rejects everyone now, before lamenting how lonely she is. And then she gets news Rei is alive in the hospital. Shinji shows up at the hospital and thanks Rei for saving his life earlier, but Rei responds with confusion, like she doesn't remember this. She returns home and sees Gendo's glasses, confused as she's seeing these for the first time, but also not the first time. She tries to crush them but begins to cry, again also for the not first time. Misato is investigating the capsule that Kanji gave her before, finding a passcode to Central Dogma inside. Ritsuko calls Shinji and tells him to visit her as soon as possible, while the security restrictions on the pilots are temporarily lifted. Ritsuko is held at gunpoint by Misato, who demands that she tell her everything she knows about the project behind the door. Ritsuko then reveals that she brought Shinji with her, and everything one of them sees, he gets to see as well. They take an elevator ride down to Gehern's old facility where they witness the room where Rei was born, then keep going to a mass disposal site of early Eva units, full of bones. Shinji is shocked as he learns that the Eva units are basically humans, made with flesh and blood in the image of the angels. Through this video and the show itself, they're occasionally referred to as robots, and that's only a convention made for simplicity in description. Evangelion has a lot of cool tech, but ultimately the robots at the core of it are just big people, to oversimplify. And this is the point of the series as well. It's not about robots, but big people. Big in the pejorative sense, like large personalities. The trio then arrives at the bottom of the facility where they see where the dummy plugs have been getting made, revealing a tank full of clones of Rei. This was the true result of the discovery at the South Pole 15 years ago. These dummy Reis are just husks of humans without souls. The Eva units are the same way. In order to make the Eva units function, they needed to artificially place a human soul inside, the purpose of the experiments all those years ago, when Shinji saw his mother for the last time. Ritsuko recently learned, as she was being interrogated by SEELE, that she was sent in place of Rei to protect the pilot. Since these pilots were just soulless husks of human beings, this meant that Gendo valued her less than the body of Rei with no personality or soul. At this, she flushes the system of the remaining Reis, killing all of the bodies as she breaks down in tears, telling Misato to shoot her already. Misato doesn't shoot, knowing that the curse that affects everyone who's involved with the Evangelion project has hurt her old friend as much as it's hurt anyone else. The Final Messenger. The Beginning of the End, or Knockin' on Heaven's Door. A young Asuka runs to her mother, excited to tell her that she has been selected as an Eva pilot, and that she's finally found some meaning in her life, but when she opens the door to her mother's room, she only finds her body. In the present, Asuka is sitting around in a dilapidated house when Nerv security retrieves her for a return to the facility. Back at Nerv, Hyuga mentions that they've recovered Asuka, with Misato wondering how she was able to evade security in the first place and whether her recovery lining up with the arrival of the fifth child is coincidence. Gendo interrogates Ritsuko about her destruction of the dummy system, though Ritsuko says she was trying to destroy Rei, also saying she doesn't believe that Gendo's actually upset with her because he never expected anything from her in the first place. Shinji looks at the destruction from Rei's fight last episode, which is now a crater lake, and when he realizes that all his friends have either evacuated or are now impossible to talk to, he also realizes he's completely alone. And then a boy named Kaoru begins to sing nearby, praising the musical creations of humans and greeting Shinji by his name. Kaoru introduces himself as the fifth child. Hyuga says that he's hacked into files on Kaoru to learn more about him, only to see that everything has been scrubbed clean, just as they were with Rei. With no tricks to try, Misato begins a sync test as normal, where Nerv discovers he has an unusually high sync rate with Unit 2, despite it being his first test. Afterwards he meets with Rei, hinting at their natures by claiming that the two of them are the same, with Rei acting suspicious of the boy. After this, he talks to Shinji as he's worried about returning home, offering to bathe with him afterwards. While in the bats at Nerv, Kaworu ponders the human condition, that mankind is terrified of opening themselves up to other people, and yet they're just as scared of sealing themselves away. As such, humans are constantly in pain on the inside, but he admits that there are some people easier to open up to that makes the burden lessened. SEELE meets about what to do to wrest control of Nerv away from Gendo due to his betrayal, as Gendo talks directly to Unit 1, addressing her as Yui, revealing that, with the Lance of Longinus out of the picture, there are no more obstacles in the way of his plans. Gendo has even grafted Adam onto his hand in anticipation. Misato returns home to an empty apartment, discussing how unlikely it was that that apartment of all places remained standing, given all the other destruction. Not wanting anybody else close to her to get hurt, she hugs Pinpin and gives him a goodbye before he's sent away. Shinji spends the night at Kaworu's house, opening up to him about his life before Nerv and how much he hates his father. Shinji wonders if it's okay to be opening up like this, but the fifth child assuages him by saying he feels like he was born to meet Shinji. The next day, Kaworu wakes up early to communicate with SEELE, where his real existence is explained. He must stop Gendo's plan to elevate himself to godhood. Kaworu is the spawn of Adam, and humans are the spawn of Lilith, both of whom are the angels that have come to Earth before. SEELE and Kaworu's mission is to eliminate the spawn of Lilith, or Lilim, from Earth. Misato watches this conversation from a distance but doesn't see who he's talking to or what he's saying, so she asks Hyuga if he's obtained any new information. He's learned that the fifth child can change his sync rate at will, which shouldn't be possible. He's also found the location of where Ritsuko is being held. So Misato asks her about the fifth child, and Ritsuko tells her he's not a human but an angel sent by SEELE. Then, Unit 2 activates without a pilot. Gendo realizes that SEELE got an angel directly into the Geofront, and they dispatch Shinji to fight this angel, to stop Kaworu before he can reach Central Dogma and initiate the third impact. As he heads down there, Misato prepares to have the facility self-destruct if Shinji's life signs, or Unit 1s, stop being reported. Each of the angels sent thus far has been an improvement on the angels that came before it, and the final messenger is one who doesn't use force to make contact but instead tries to appeal to humanity. The last few angels have tried probing the minds of the pilots to learn about how humans think in order to defeat them. Tying into the theme of the Hedgehog's dilemma, in this instance, the fact of opening oneself up to others is potentially fatal to all of humanity. Kaworu points out how an AT field is a literal manifestation of one's desire to shut themselves off from the rest of the world, the fear, or absolute terror, one feels when under threat of exposing their emotions to others. Kaworu got past this barrier not with a weapon, but kindness. Rei briefly appears in the room, creating a massive AT field of her own before it vanishes, and the field short out the instruments Nerv was using to watch the battle, as well as shorting the equipment needed to initiate the self-destruct, leaving them helpless to watch as Kaworu and Unit 2 breach the LCL plant where Lilith is being held. But Kaworu realizes that this is Lilith and not Adam down there, and as he is second-guessing his decision to destroy humanity, Shinji enters the room. Kaworu says that the angels and humans cannot coexist, and so long as he's alive, he is a threat to humanity. He then decides that he likes Shinji too much to allow that to happen, and allows Shinji to kill him. Shinji hesitates for a long time, wondering whether he loves Kaworu more than he loves humanity, including himself. He ultimately squeezes the guy's neck off. Later, Misato tries to comfort Shinji by saying that only the people with the will to survive will survive, but Shinji calls this cold-hearted. Kaworu made the ultimate sacrifice of his own life to protect others, which throws a complication into the entire theme thus far of survival. It's shown that the most human thing we can do is to keep living, but there's more to it than that. It's not just about living, but helping others survive as well, yet here, Kaworu was willing to give his own life for the sake of others. Shinji disagrees with the sentiment, upset because Kaworu was everything to him, and wondering what he now has left to live for if not those close to him. What's the point of just being alive if you don't have people to live for? Shinji has, in a way, given his own life to help others before, sacrificing almost everything to pilot an Eva. Since this is the only meaning to his life and exception of everything else, it's the only way he defines his existence. And then the one time he found someone else to really live for, he lost that too. Part of the reason why we hurt ourselves when we open ourselves up to other people isn't just the metaphorical hedgehogs stabbing one another when they embrace, but the pain of letting the hug end after it's over. The world ending. Do you love me? Shinji is regretting the fact that he killed Kaworu last episode, attempting to justify it by saying it was either him or me, and that what he did was for the good of humanity or whatever. This is the same reason he pilots the Eva, because it's for the good of humanity. But with the recent killing on top of so many others, Shinji begins to worry that his reason for piloting is wrong. Because he feels guilt over killing Kaworu and guilt over nearly killing Toji before, and yet the Eva battles have been shown as causing massive collateral damage too. One of his first interactions after transferring is dealing with the rage of a classmate whose sister was injured basically as an afterthought. The idea that Tokyo 3 was properly evacuated every single time is absurd, and yet it's never really given consideration beyond the immediate deaths Shinji has felt himself responsible for. He never even considered killing angels to be an issue, until one of them spoke and looked like a human too. Asuka, the version of Asuka who lives in Shinji's head, calls him selfish for thinking this way, saying he only pilots the Eva for himself because he wants people to look up to him and to find him useful. But Rei, in Asuka's head, calls her a hypocrite for thinking the same way and daring to criticize others for it. In fact, Asuka has valued herself by her usefulness to others so much that she no longer thinks she exists in any real capacity, because she can no longer pilot the Eva. This forces Rei to question whether she is real or not, given that there are so many versions of her who all seem to be considered the real Rei, even though they don't share memories or experiences. She concludes that she is Rei Ayanami because other people call her Rei Ayanami. Instrumentality begins, which Gendo explains not as a return to nothing, but a return to everything, to the form in which everyone once was. Ritsuko says that the default state of the human soul is emptiness, and this is why life is painful. To merge with everyone else as a part of instrumentality is a way to remove the pain from existence, filling the gaps in our perception of ourselves with the souls of other people and the version of us that exist in their minds. But Misato says that Gendo and Nerv don't have a right to force this onto other people, only for this to turn instead into an examination of what Misato has in her life, supposedly better than returning to LCL. Misato's mind tries to answer the question of what she wants out of life, the answer during her childhood to be well-behaved so as not to bother her parents, while the adult version of her is tired of being good and wants to be bad instead. Her being bad manifests as her relationship to Kaji, but when this is scrutinized, she fears other people seeing it and judging her for it, especially Shinji. Misato's attempts to burn off frustration or drink excessively or do so many other slob-like things as a means of controlling her life are to her just coping mechanisms. But to the people who perceive her, these girl failure traits are the only thing they see, and thus her identity is conflated with her lowest moments. Asuka recalls how her mother looked on the day she died, smiling. She's raging that a woman that made her so miserable can lose everything and still somehow appear to be happy in her final moment, while Asuka had to suffer not being wanted by her father or stepmother. Shinji then sees himself on a stage, watching himself and wondering what this is. It's explained as the Human Instrumentality Project, or a world created from Shinji's wishes, where no one gets to be saved. He justifies not saving anybody by saying no one saved him, and that it isn't his fault, but this is still the desire of his heart to be completely closed off to other people. The beast that shouted, "I," at the heart of the world. Take care of yourself. For clarification on the title, I means love in Japanese. It's a pun. Shinji begins to worry that he is going to cease to exist. Not so much fear over disappearing, but worried because he's not as afraid of this idea as he should be. This is explained as a fear of failure, that to give into instrumentality means to lose the barrier between yourself and other people. But this was always something people could do in a small way while alive, pre-instrumentality. The fear comes from opening up to somebody, failing, and getting nothing out of it but the pain. When confronted by this, Shinji learns that everybody fears the same thing. It's part of being human, getting over this fear through exposure. This is the flaw in Shinji's mantra of "I mustn't run away," because running only weakens you to more pain later. The thing he's running from might hurt, but it will hurt a bit less every time he stays put. But while this explains the effect of running away, it doesn't answer the question of why Shinji's running in the first place. He fears that if he leaves, people will hate him, but if he stays, people won't hate him, except this isn't true because Shinji feels like people hate him anyway. But this is too small of a way of thinking. When Shinji runs away from other people, it's not just him who's being hurt, but the others as well. He just never stopped to consider what they wanted, nor if what they thought of him was even true. Shinji isn't hated by others, he just thinks other people don't like him. He isn't only respected just because he pilots the Eva, he just refuses to listen to praise unrelated to his piloting. He only accepts hatred when he feels like he deserves it, and he only accepts praise when he's willing to praise himself first. An insult doesn't mean anything unless it's from a person you care about. This point is then illustrated by giving Shinji everything he ever wanted, floating through the air with no challenges to him and no restrictions on what he can do. But without challenges and restrictions, he simply floats around with no needs or wants. He is then given a restriction, gravity, represented by a line on the horizon. With this restriction, he now has a sense of motion, but the concept of up and down and forwards are still relative to him. Everything works the same way. The things Shinji knows as truths are things that he defines as truth himself. His perception of the world is then shaped around this. If he believes other people like him, he can start to imagine others liking him, and then that can become the truth. Shinji wakes up in his bed to his childhood friend Asuka, trying to get him to go to school, though when she throws off his covers, they're both embarrassed by the morning wood he has. Gendo and Yui discuss how nice it is that Asuka wakes up Shinji every morning, just like she tries to make sure that Gendo gets ready for his job at the university, to the point where Fuyutsuki even blames her if he is late. Shinji and Asuka run to school past a street crowded with cars, as they discuss how lively the city is becoming. Then, when he rounds a corner, he runs into Rei. He brags to his friends that he saw her underwear when she was knocked down, but Hikari gets annoyed with the boys for this vulgar discussion. They're all distracted when the teacher, Misato, comes into the building, waving at the boys, including an excited Shinji. Then the new transfer student arrives, Rei, who's almost immediately upset with Shinji when she recognizes him. Asuka almost defends Shinji, but her relationship to him then gets teased by the others as the animation quality degrades. Shinji considers this alternate reality as a possibility, and realizes that if something that drastic were possible, it's also possible that he could be loved even without piloting the Eva. This is the point where Shinji realizes that he only needs to love himself first if he wants others to love him, and then the stage clears as he himself appears in an empty space with the entire cast congratulating him. After these congratulations, Shinji thanks them all for letting him get here, and the show ends on that note. Hold on, wait, didn't Evangelion have giant robots in it? End of Evangelion. I need you. Shinji is regretting the fact that he killed Kaworu last episode, attempting to justify it by saying it was either Kaworu or him, and that what he did was for the good of humanity, or whatever. He tries to turn to someone, anybody else he could possibly talk to about this situation, but as everyone else has left him, he turns to the comatose Asuka in her hospital bed. But when he exposes her, he decides to relieve himself sexually instead, what Shinji considers his lowest point. The rest of Nerv is unsure about what to do now that the final angel has been defeated, wondering if they'll even be kept around since their purpose has been fulfilled. But SEELE has been meeting about their own plans, frustrated that they can't use the Lance of Longinus to initiate the third impact, and they'll have to use Eva Unit 1 instead, as it's the only true offspring of Lilith. Because Gendo isn't cooperating with them, they have to take it by force. This forced attack is initially done by trying to hack the Magi, with several other supercomputers attempting to overtake the facility and forcing Nerv to rely on Ritsuko to defend against the invasion. Ritsuko is upset that a man who rejected her advances before is now asking for her help, but agrees to save Nerv alongside her mother again. Her programming skills are able to push back against the invasion easily. Too easily, as the real assault begins, a physical one. Several JSSDF assaults begin from the area surrounding the Geofront, launching an attack on their equipment above ground before forcefully entering the area underground and taking out any employees they find, regardless of whether or not they're surrendering. Misato orders the hallways flooded with the same material they used to restrain the Eva units, as Gendo orders Fuyutsuki to manage the defense as he heads deeper into Terminal Dogma. Fuyutsuki asks Gendo to give his regards to Yui. Misato also orders the Eva pilots to be placed inside of their units for protection, even the unresponsive Asuka, because the Eva units are the safest place to be. The rest of Nerv's bridge employees panic over the soldiers entering their position, realizing that SEELE had been preparing to kill them from the start. Misato learns that Shinji and Rei are not near their Eva units, so she heads out herself to go retrieve Shinji, cowering beneath some stairs and talking to himself. She is able to save him from the soldiers, but can't save him from himself because he's still asking for Asuka's help over and over. On the way to the Evangelion cage, she explains her findings about Nerv's history to him. The second impact was triggered by SEELE on purpose, and humanity is descended from an angel-like being known as Lilith, with the descendants of Adam simply being humans who gave up human form, being one other possibility of life. Thus, humankind collectively makes up the 18th and final angel, unable to coexist with the others. The JSSDF drops an N2 mine directly on the geofront, exposing the entire area to the sky as more and more missiles rain in from above. They search for Asuka and Unit 2, finding her safely placed at the bottom of the lake in a fetal position. She repeats that she doesn't want to die over and over, hearing the mother's voice asking her to die with her like before. But then, she hears her mother's voice agreeing with her, sparking the realization that Kyoko's soul is inside of the Eva, and they've been together for nearly a year now. Asuka awakens from her depression, happily fighting alongside her mother as she deals heavy damage to the JSSDF forces as they fail to cut through her AT field. So they resort to an alternative strategy, cutting the umbilical cord providing Unit 2 with power before dropping the artificial Eva series from above, equipped with Kaworu inside of their dummy plugs. Asuka only has a few minutes to fight all of these Evas, but is confident she can manage it, brutally tearing several of them apart despite being outnumbered. Beneath the surface, Misato is trying to drag Shinji into Unit 1 while being pursued by soldiers. One of them manages to injure Misato before she can seal the door behind them and push Shinji up to the elevator. Here, she tries to convince him to fight despite him believing he's too worthless to pilot the Eva. But Misato gives him her father's cross, mirroring the scene where he gave it to her before surviving the second impact. She tells him to promise to find out the meaning of his existence before kissing him and shoving him onto the elevator, lying that her wounds aren't so bad and they'll definitely meet again. Once Shinji is out of sight, she collapses and Rei stands over her. Gendo has made it to Terminal Dogma, where Rei was looking at the remains of her clones. He prepares for his final plan before being stopped by Ritsuko. As she was defending against the hacking attack, she also reprogrammed the Magi to activate a self-destruct on the whole facility, triggering the explosion and waiting for the whole thing to come crashing down. But nothing happens, with Ritsuko realizing that one of the Magi has rejected the command, choosing Gendo over her own daughter. Gendo tells Ritsuko the truth, but this is muted, and he shoots her backwards into the pool of LCL. Up on the surface, Asuka and her mother manage to defeat the last of the angels, only for one to toss its spear at her. She uses her AT field to stop it, but the spear morphs into the shape of the Lance of Longinus, penetrating the AT field and Asuka's eye. The rest of the artificial angels start resurrecting as they sprout wings and they fly into the air, descending onto the pinned Eva and then eating Unit 2. Asuka tries one last time to go berserk and continue the fight, only to be stabbed by several more spears. Shinji has been listening to this entire fight inside of the Eva cage, but when he hears Asuka mentions that the Eva units have their mother's souls inside, Unit 1 moves on its own and breaks free, Shinji finally climbing inside of it to ascend to the surface by blasting the ground above him with an AT field. He reaches the fight only to see Asuka's destroyed Eva, screaming in terror as the first half of the movie ends. Gendo tells Rei that the only way he can be reunited with Yui again is to initiate instrumentality by merging Adam from his hand with the Lilith inside of Rei. He grabs her and begins the process, though Rei, fused with Lilith, rejects Gendo's wishes because she does not want to be his doll, and she begins to aid in Shinji's plan for instrumentality. Gendo begs for her to wait, but is ignored. Unit 1 breaks free from its armor and summons the Lance of Longinus, which concerns SEELE enough that they realize they have a hope for their plan after all. They crucify Unit 1 and bring it into the air, forming an anti-AT field and exposing the Black Moon, the egg of Lilith, from beneath Central Dogma. A massive ghostly ray emerges from the ground, passing through what's left of Nerv and horrifying everybody there as she rises up to meet Shinji's eyes. The Eva units begin to grow tiny rays across their body, with Shinji's horror turning into acceptance once he sees that the giant ray has taken the form of Kaworu, his AT field finally breaking down enough to accept the Lance of Longinus into the Eva's core, merging with it. As he now has the Fruit of Life and Fruit of Knowledge from the Angels and Humanity respectively, Shinji and Unit 1 have become a god. It is now up to Shinji to determine the fate of humanity, to either give into or reject instrumentality. Inside of Shinji's mind, this is reflected as him as a child playing in a sandpit with other doll-like children. They're called away by their mother as Shinji is left alone to construct the pyramid inside of the geofront out of the sand. But he rages at the building, knocking it down with a foot, before reconstructing it anyway. His thoughts then start to merge with the others in his life, Misato regretting her inability to be a good parental figure to Shinji, Asuka's disgust with him, but also Misato's flaws of her own and Asuka's rejection of getting close to anybody, not just him. Shinji tries to defend himself by saying it's impossible to understand Asuka when she rejects any attempt by others to get to know her. He appears back in the apartment with Asuka by his side, Shinji pleading for a way to help her, only for Asuka to say he can only aid her by never coming back again. She shoves him over and calls him pathetic for continuing to use other people as crutches for his own lack of self-esteem, knowing he'll just reject them anyway, and giving him a defense against having to do anything himself. Shinji rages, strangling Asuka, and beginning instrumentality. His vital signs fade to zero and billions of Rei begin to appear surrounding the people of the world, shapeshifting into the form of whatever that person desires the most before they turn into LCL. Even SEELE celebrates some form of success as their monoliths disappear one by one. A bleeding Gendo lays on the ground, regretting that he spent his whole life rejecting other people because no one would ever love him as much as Yui did, even turning away his own son. The mass-produced Eva begin to pierce their own cores as an ocean of blood, red, and crosses covers the earth with a giant Lilith/Rei merging with the Tree of Life that has become of Shinji and the Lance. Shinji then gets exactly what he wanted, a world without ego barriers between people. But with no other people, there's no way to produce an identity. Then words like love no longer mean anything because you can only love yourself even though you don't exist. He rejects this reality and emerges from the Eye of Lilith before there's a flashback to Fuyutsuki's conversation with Yui about the Eva series. She believes, as long as there is a sun, an earth, and a moon, life will continue, and the Eva can exist forever too, becoming a god if it chooses. An indeterminate amount of time later, Shinji has manifested on the beach as the crucified mass-produced Eva series have fallen to Earth. He is there with Asuka, and begins to strangle her. But Asuka reaches out to him, a difference between the two, and seeing her move, Shinji lets go. Outro. Neon Genesis Evangelion from the very title of the show has a lot of religious imagery, which has been the subject of a large amount of the discussion and analysis of the show and its legacy. As I stated at the start of this video, Neon Genesis Evangelion is not a monolith. It borrows from so many other series in tone and message, and is a product of the era in which it was created as much as any other work of media, only gaining notoriety because of the quality and combination of these other aspects, which hadn't been seen up to that point. So when I mention Catholic elements in the theming of NGE, it is worth mentioning that this inspiration is taken less from actual Christianity and its impact on the creative team, and more so because Ultraman did it first and Anno thought Ultraman was cool. Evangelion is rather infamously a series that had to have its entire plot rewritten only months before it aired because of the similarities some events had to a real-world gas attack by a cult in Japan. Even then, several details were still changed late into production as the whims of the writer changed towards something else. The instrumentality project originally failed as humanity remained unique and distinct from one another, but was changed to reflect the tone and new direction of the script. These details don't necessarily detract from the series, and if anything, elevate Neon Genesis Evangelion to a more personal height, as we see ourselves in a series with imperfections, just as much as we see ourselves in characters with imperfections. And maybe that's the entire point of the show. The characters are all flawed, fighting a battle that requires and demands perfection out of them. Only the battle never actually required any of that, and the people were never flawed, because to be flawed means that there is an ideal way to be, and that isn't true at all. Every person in this show, and in real life, has issues that make them unique and are only knowable to themselves. And early on in Evangelion, this is viewed as the source of all human suffering. We can never truly be known by another person because no one will ever be able to experience the sum of our lives other than ourselves. The only person who knows who you are is you, and even this is tenuous because we can spend our whole lives trying to define this. But the counterpoint to all of this is that the self does not exist, at least not in a capacity that matters. The reason we don't understand ourselves is because we keep changing as we grow and interact with other people. And these interactions are the true thing that defines who we are. It's not what we think, but what we do and what others think of that. Sure, it's terrifying to know that we have so little control over the definition that others assign to us, but why does that matter if you're the one who decides whether their perception matters or not? Neon Genesis Evangelion is a show that doesn't have a point. Not in the sense that it's a bunch of random, meaningless nonsense, but the fact that I cannot tell you its meaning, just like I cannot tell you the meaning of anything. It's what you think about the show that defines what it means. This anime that people keep referencing 20 years after its... Wait, 30 years? Uh-oh.